Hello, I'm waiting for everything to start, and I'm trying to confirm that we're actually on here because Facebook has sort of changed the page for this live stream thing. Uh, so it says I'm rolling, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. I have no idea whether you're listening or not, but it's only going to be about 10 minutes worth this morning. Uh, so we'll see. It looks like somebody's responding here. So it looks like we're on. Today, welcome sequestarians. This is almost like a monastic thing. We're like monks and nuns together. So that's how it feels, like a mystical order of some kind. It better, otherwise it just feels sort of miserable. But anyway, I hope you're all doing well. This is chapter 7. It'll be chapter 7 part 1 because chapter 7's a little long, so I don't want to take too much of our time this morning. But anyway, it's of My Life with the Spirits. Chapter 7, which is called California Dreamin'. And here we go. A couple weeks after my humiliation at the communion rail, I packed up my VW bus and drove as fast as I could out of Nebraska. The long nightmare was over and my future beckoned me from Golden, California. I knew everything would change, but I had no idea how much. The world in 1966 was far more interesting than college. I studied very little. As a drama major, I soon discovered I could get through most of my classes by simply acting like a college student. I was just happy to be back home in California. It was everything I remembered and more. Almost immediately, I found work in the evening singing folk music in local saloons. I had more audacity than ability and was so entirely unconscious of my own lack of talent that I sometimes fooled other people as well. Among them were the owners of some of the most famous folk clubs in the country, including Huntington Beach's famed Golden Bear, where I twice found myself opening act for my idol, Hoyt Axton. I was soon befriended by other local musicians. Foremost among these was fellow Midwesterner Charlie D. Harris, who had just returned from a successful stint in Hawaii. Charlie was 10 years older than I and had already made almost every mistake a young musician could make. And my footnote says he was saving a few he could make with me. He was ready to settle down and get serious about songwriting. I convinced him to allow me to collaborate with his efforts. We were remarkably prolific and soon produced a respectable portfolio of songs, which, if I say so myself, we presented quite well. Charlie had a great voice, and our harmonies were very tight. This combination of skills got us through several doors in the Hollywood publishing world and earned us a measure of local notoriety. I wallowed in my local stardom. I was very poor, but life was sweet. Like most musicians, I smoked a little grass and waxed philosophical with my colleagues over midnight steak and eggs. Man, like, did you ever notice that dog spelled backwards is God? But spiritually, I was the farthest thing, but spirituality was the farthest thing from my mind. LSD would change that. I dropped my first hit with a fellow musician in the men's room of a Belmont Shore blues club. It was my friend's first trip also. Once safely back at his apartment, he went into the bedroom, closed the door, and remained there. I flopped down on the living room floor and for the next 6 hours repeatedly picked myself apart and put myself back together. Don't worry, I won't bore the reader with another I saw God on acid story. It's more like I introduced myself to myself story. I discovered that myself was an infinitely greater thing than I had ever imagined, and realized with technicolor certitude that understanding myself was going to be the only endeavor in life worth pursuing. By daybreak, the doors of perception had closed enough for me to put on my shoes and walk across town to my own apartment. Everything looked very different. Trees and shrubs radiated luminous auras. Telephone and power lines were coiled around with bright red and green magnetic bands. The visual effects were dazzling, but no longer a wondrous distraction. My mind was focused on one joyous revelation. Everything that everybody is looking for in religion is already inside our own heads. There's no reason to believe anything. There's no reason to pray to anything. It can all be experienced. It must all be experienced. That's what we are here to do. I encouraged my brother Mark to join me on my next trip about 10 days later, and we found that we communicated very well under the influence. In the weeks that followed, we read everything we could get our hands on about LSD and the psychedelic phenomenon. Almost every article compared the experience to the ecstatic visions of Eastern mystics and primitive shamans. I haunted the Eastern philosophy section of my college library and indiscriminately skimmed through anything I thought might show me where to start my holy quest. Mark began investigating yoga and the various yoga institutions in Southern California. We put ourselves on an experimental vegetarian diet and started practicing the physical exercises from Swami Vishnu Devananda's illustrated book on Hatha Yoga. We weren't bad. Both of us were surprisingly limber and could sit in a full lotus for what we considered quite a long time. I could even stand on my head in a full lotus position and demand, "Someone take my picture." And that's one of the few illustrations in the book. At first, we thought we could mix our psychedelics and yoga. Like idiots, we registered for an all-day Christmas meditation at Paramahansa Yogananda's Self-Realization Fellowship Temple. In order to make sure we would get the maximum spiritual impact from the day, Mark baked the most extraordinary loaf of marijuana banana bread. It was the first time we had ever tried this recipe. And the footnote is the recipe. Do you want me to read the recipe? I think I will. As I recall, he soaked an entire, what we called a lid, of clean grass in tequila. When the tequila evaporated, he then blended the paste with a pound of melted butter. After allowing it to harden, he then used the loaded butter in a standard banana bread recipe. Kids don't try this at home. Okay, it was the first time we had ever tried this recipe, so we were unsure how it would affect us. It was very tasty, so delicious, in fact, that we couldn't believe it could be very potent. Just minutes prior to entering the temple, we sat in the car and gorged ourselves on the whole loaf. We were warmly welcomed by a serene-looking monk who ushered us into the meditation room. In the east was a small altar displaying portraits of the line of SRF gurus. Facing the altar were 5 or 6 rows of straight-backed wooden chairs with padded seats. A neatly folded blanket hung over the back of each chair. "Do we have to sit in these chairs?" I asked with affected humility. "We would prefer to sit on the floor in our asana." The monk looked at us incredulously. "My friends, this is an 8-hour meditation. I'm sure you'll be more comfortable seated in the chairs for that amount of time." "We'll be the judge of that," Mark replied with a patronizing giggle. We couldn't understand why the monk didn't believe we preferred to meditate on the floor with our legs locked in a full lotus posture like real yogis. "What kind of yogis are these?" Mark thought. By now, the banana bread was taking effect, and I could read his mind. "Yeah," he answered mentally. "He must think we are some kind of white guys." The monk showed us where we could sit on the floor and informed us that there'd be a break in 2.5 hours in case we wanted to move to chairs at that time. "We'll be fine," I assured him. Within a few minutes, the little chapel was filled with neatly dressed devotees. None of them elected to join the 2 real yogis on the floor. The monk said a few words about Christmas being a very spiritual season and quoted a little from the writings of Yogananda. Then we all chanted a few of the order's cosmic chants and settled in for 2.5-hour period of silent meditation. Mark and I immediately realized that it was a big mistake to have eaten all the banana bread. We were painfully high. We turned to one another and looked helplessly at each other's bulging yellow eyes and mentally screamed, "We gotta get out of here." Nevertheless, we closed our eyes and tried to be troopers. Our legs soon fell asleep, and without the distraction of pain, so did I. I guess I was snoring pretty loudly when Mark jabbed me in the ribs with his elbow. The monk opened one eye and silently glowered at us. It was absolutely amazing. We could read his mind too. We squirmed and dozed through the longest 2.5 hours of our lives and quietly slithered to the car during the first break. We would not return to finish the meditation. For the next few months, psychedelic experiments would remain the centerpiece of our spiritual exploration. The dramatic events at our day at Joshua Tree would be the culmination of this period. And that's where we'll end it today. There's a little more to finish on chapter 7. I hope you're all being good to yourselves, being careful and cautious, and trying to relax as much as possible. I will see you tomorrow. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. Bye-bye.